Good morning. Let me add my welcome. I'm glad to see we have enough people to have a conversation here this morning. That is our aim, is to have a conversation. So we have two people that will help provoke, I hope, some thoughts from all of you. But also we're looking, as Maureen said, we're really on a search here. Walter last year challenged all of us who run programs at the Institute to think about what is our role in addressing growing income inequality. And so from the Business and Society program perspective, we naturally think about what's business's role here? What role can it play? So today I'm delighted that Blair Taylor is here from Starbucks. He works as the Chief Community Officer at Starbucks. Maybe you'll start out by telling us exactly what that means, Blair. But he joined Starbucks in the Los Angeles Urban League, but has also spent considerable amount of time who's at Pepsi and at IBM. He tells me 2/3 of his career has been in corporate America. So we're going to start out hearing from him, I think, a little bit about how business is viewing this issue today. And then, of course, I'm delighted that Senator Mark Warner from Virginia has joined us. He's really masquerading as a senator. He's also a business guy. So he comes at this question with deep experience himself in the private sector, but also as a governor and then the senior senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we're delighted to have them both here. I thought we'd start today with you, Blair, if we might, and kind of help us think about, is this on the mind of business? We assume it is personally, that they're seeing the same things we are, but as business people, kind of what are you seeing, both from within Starbucks and beyond?
Yeah, so I appreciate it, and wonderful to be here with all of you this morning. Thanks for not sleeping in, so we appreciate that. First, let me start just with the sort of uber level on this, and I think that sets the tone and paints the picture why business cares. If you look at the inequality in America today, the growing inequality in America, we've gone from number one in terms of social and economic mobility in the United States to, I think the latest numbers are number 23 or 24 in the world. And so what's happening is, if you think about it as an hourglass, we've got the top of the hourglass that's growing at a pretty healthy rate. The bottom of the hourglass is growing, unfortunately, at probably twice the rate of the top, and the middle of the hourglass is being squeezed to oblivion. So what traditionally set the United States apart from other countries around the world in the 20th century, which is access to the middle class and the ability to sort of rise up from an income and socioeconomic status ability, quite frankly, in our era, is going away. And at the same time, that burgeoning underclass, economically speaking, is becoming an increasing burden on society. In my grandmother's and my parents' era, which wasn't that long ago, 40, 50 years ago, you could work in a blue-collar job and own your home and send your kids to college and all the things that are so tied to the American dream. And we're seeing an evaporation of that before our eyes. So the question is, what should we be doing about it? And I would make the argument, which I talked a little about yesterday, that this issue, particularly of this burgeoning group of disengaged young people, which is now about 6 million, category called opportunity youth. It's about 6 million young people in the US, more than 300 million worldwide, is the issue of our time. So if you put all that in context, and what companies like ours are starting to ask ourselves, and you hear our CEO, Howard Schultz, say this all the time, which is, what's the role and responsibility of a for-profit company in this environment? What should we be doing? And we think minimally what we should be doing and what we need to be doing is looking at ways of investing in the future and investing in young people and investing in our workforce in ways that will allow them to grow and develop. And thinking not just inside of Starbucks, but outside of Starbucks. And I'll talk to you more about that in just a second, but literally thinking about how do we create pathways of opportunity for young people so that they can move from one economic class, if you will, to the next. And recognizing that those young people who are in that disengaged youth category or opportunity youth category, those young people are the future of America. Those are our employees, those are our future customers, and if they're not engaged and they're not earning an income and they don't have a career track, then American business is in serious trouble in the next 20 years. In fact, I would say we as a nation are in serious trouble.
But are they talking about it?
You know, it's interesting. So I've been on both sides of this fence. I've been in corporate America, I've been in the nonprofit sector, I've run large nonprofits, and I've been a little bit of time in local government over the course of my career. And I would say in the last 5 to 6 years, this topic is starting to heat up in the halls, in the senior level halls of corporate America, because there's a recognition that the growth trajectory of business cannot possibly continue if the wealth and status and well-being of the American population is going in the opposite direction. And so there's a recognition that the labor pool can't be going this way and the growth of American business going this way, that eventually those two lines have a problem going in opposite directions. And I will tell you that I think 15, 20 years ago, the notion of a business engaging, and I'm going to call it on the other side of town, which is, what do we do about urban population centers, was purely a philanthropic question. It was a we'll do some things for low-income communities and poor people because it's the right thing to do, because it's altruistic and it's a good thing to do. Today, what you're seeing the conversation emerge to now, and I think we are trying to lead as much as we can in this space, is this is a business imperative. We absolutely must have these young people as part of this economy for our businesses to continue to grow and thrive. And I would say that from a corporate perspective, that means how do you innovate? How do you think about things differently? Now, the senator obviously is coming from the federal government, and my argument would be, as wonderful as the federal government has been on social and economic change in the 20th century, I think the senator would probably agree that in the 21st century, that's much harder to envision the federal government leading the way they did in the 20th century, in part because of gridlock and all the things that we're seeing in Congress today. And so where do those innovations come from? Well, they come from rooms like this. They're going to need to come from the nonprofit sector. They're going to need to come from the philanthropic sector. They're going to need to come from the corporate sector. And so in the 21st century, there's going to be an incredible need for us to collaborate in ways that we never have before. And to be honest, just to put this on the table, we're not very good at it. I mean, we haven't gotten to the point yet where we have actually figured out how to enable corporate America to engage with the nonprofit sector in a way that allows both sides to share and to win.
So maybe we can come back to this in terms of, I hope we can get back to really drilling down on how the change will take place. But Senator, let me turn to you. Well, you've been giving a lot of thought to this question, this challenge. Where are you at?
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for having me, and it's great to be with Blair again. And Starbucks is actually walking the walk, and they ought to be commended. Judy mentioned the fact, and for some of them were friends, the Rutherfords and others know this, but I actually still can claim I was in business longer than I've been in politics. I spent 20 years in the telecom. I was a co-founder of Nextel, been in the venture business. But it is a subject that I've been thinking a lot about. And let me give you 3 or 4 kind of, I think, interrelated thoughts, hopefully a little provocative, and then where at least it's leading my thinking. First, I would argue that we're in a kind of enormously unique moment in time. That kind of classic economics that we all grew up with, which was, in the market, you have an abundance of labor and a shortage of capital. So all of our policies need to be about aggregation of capital. And you think about that from interest deduction, capital gains, a slew of policies, has actually, at least in the industrial world, particularly in America in the last 30 years, been turned on its head. We got plenty of capital, but a shortage of qualified labor. And that's a big fundamental change that we've never had to deal with before. Second, and I say this as while I'm a Democrat and now a senator, I am a hardcore capitalist, but I believe the focus on short-termism in capitalism will ultimately kill capitalism. And I think there is a growing recognition from both smart companies and I think about Larry Fink at BlackRock, smart investors, that this is taking place. Third, that the traditional ability for government to come in and kind of shore up the bottom because of our the national government's impossibly bad fiscal balance sheet at this point. It's close to 18 trillion in debt. That 100 basis point increase in interest rates adds $120 billion just in debt payments each year. Our ability to kind of make the kind of investments that the federal government has in the past in things like training and education and others, unfortunately, that's the place that's first getting chopped in the era of stupidity around sequestration. So, is there a way to think differently about how we get at this issue? And I think there is we're going to hear from Blair about what Starbucks is doing, but Mark Bertolini at Aetna raised base salary at Aetna, fairly high-paying firm, but simply raising base level salary to $16 an hour out of their 49,000 employees, took 5,000 employees out of poverty and about 4,000 of those off government roles. You've got companies like Home Depot that have always had this kind of idea of investing. The Container Store, Kip Tindall there, who's been part of an effort called conscientious capitalism for a long time. Container Store, the average tenure of an employee, a traditional retail store is 8 years. There's a different model. So what I wonder, and as someone who finally made it onto the Finance Committee where we are looking at tax policy, and there are, I could completely make everybody's morning eyes glaze over if I go on too much on tax policy this morning, but suffice it to say, there's a lot going on in tax policy internationally. There's a lot of question about what we're going to do domestically in terms of tax policy. But I wonder if there might be an opportunity at this moment of enormous flux and change to actually rethink the corporate form. Not to say we're going to get rid of the C Corp or the S Corp or the pass-throughs, but that potentially create a whole new corporate form that might have a little more alignment towards labor as opposed to simply aggregation of capital. Because think for a moment, the corporation is the only thing that actually exists beyond a person's lifetime. It is a creature of the state. The state grants the ability to create the corporation. Yet, in the traditional modern corporation, we have defined the only benefit that the corporation has to produce is return to one narrow group of constituents, its shareholders, and increasingly that concern is not based, or that return is not based on a long-term value proposition, but with the velocity of capital is actually on a short-term quarterly basis, which I again think is destructive. So I've been working on a notion and shared it with some that said, there are efforts going around in a number of states called the B Corp, some of you may be familiar with, the kind of focus on double bottom line, social value. Very, very interesting movement, a lot of good work being done. But it really is more kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval rather than a capitalism-driven model. What I've been looking at is there a way to create a capitalism-driven model that would potentially give a corporation that would elect to choose this form a longer time horizon potentially on investment cycle, so you would be a little bit freed up from the quarterly driven returns. A lower corporate rate. I believe a third value that would come with this, if it got some momentum, would be some social value, good housekeeping seal of approval. And the cost of doing that, there's a lot more detail on this, but the cost of doing that, 2 more points I'll make very quickly, would be one, that you'd pay your workers a fair wage. This would be geared towards that low and moderate income worker. This is not going to be a benefit to Google. It would be for that low and moderate income. What is a fair wage? How do you not game it? There's a series of questions that have to be worked through there, and some of the tax analysis have to be done. Willing to invest in that worker's upskilling, not in a way that says we're going to take our CEOs and executive team to Las Vegas, but really modeling after some of the things that Starbucks is doing, or things, for example, could an employee in this, I'm calling it an R Corp for sake of having a stalking horse, you could write off part of a student debt of an employee pre-tax, for example, could be another way to invest in this upgrading of skills. I'd leave out the benefits package, so it really is on something that's measurable about pay and upskilling of the workforce. And final point I make, what would this look like if you could work through all of the obvious problems around gaming and others? The proposition at the end of the day could be if the government loses $1 in revenue, but the government pays out 70 cents less in benefits, EITC, Medicaid, food stamps, et cetera. And the company was willing to invest 50 cents in that worker's upgrading of skills. And obviously the worker would be receiving a higher salary. You could, and at least the early models indicate, end up with a worker with a net higher disposable income, number one. Number two, the government enterprise in a better fiscal state because this person is going to be more able to have upward economic mobility. The government's paying out less. The government does not do a very good job on workforce training programs. The 47 programs we have at $18 billion a year really don't pay back a lot in terms of ROI. And the corporate entity actually has a better trained, more loyal, more willing to work employee. There could be, now again, this is where the modeling has got to take us to the next step, the proverbial win-win-win, and you might just be able to have a form of capitalism that at least for part of the economy could actually become productive and give that kind of upward mobility that frankly existed in most of the 20th century. Getting from this idea to a model that could pass through a dysfunctional Congress is a long road to hoe, but when a political debate at this point that's fairly stale between top-down government redistribution versus unfettered short-term capitalism, Lord knows we do need a few new ideas to stir the pot.
So let me ask you the same question. What's the state of the conversation? Do you find...
Here's what's different. There were efforts, as I've kind of dug into this, there were efforts in the 90s in the Clinton administration to look at an idea like this, but it was way too prescriptive. I have enormous admiration for those companies and entities that are participating in the B Corp or the social double bottom line. The challenge around them they are extraordinarily prescriptive because they go to a whole host of other problems. Sustainability, economic or environmental issues, ratios between worker and CEO, lots of good things, but very, very tough to measure in a tax policy modeling. What is happening though, is there is a moment in time, both, as I mentioned, on the investor side, as investors realize the focus on short-termism, and in effect, many who, under the guise of liquidity, say we can disrupt any kind of long-term corporation for short-term return. The frustration with that kind of approach is palatable in the investor community. And you have companies like the Starbucks, like the Container Stores, like the Home Depots, like the Aetnas. You've got this new entities like Gravity and others. There are hosts of CEOs who I think are immensely interested in this, not just to kind of do the right thing, but as one of the comments yesterday in one of the panels we sat through, under the Henry Ford adage that, I'm paying my workers more because I want them to buy my stuff. So I think there is a moment in time here that is extraordinarily unique that we might not have ever seen in our lifetime, because I think the recognition that the old school maximization of value for shareholder on a quarterly basis is not working long haul. So I think the moment, can we get from that moment to a corporate form or something that can actually, a policymaker could walk into the Wall Street Journal editorial board and make the pitch? I mean, that's going to be at least what I'm going to be trying to engage in over the next 6 months, because if we could get to that stage, it could be extraordinarily dramatic.
So one of the things I'm kind of curious about, and then I would like to try to open this up, so, and hear a little bit what's on the mind of those of you in this room. But, it's kind of hard to transport ourselves when we're sitting up in this, glorious setting in Aspen. But how much, are we a long ways from the heat of the moment of when people are sleeping out in Zuccotti Park? Are you still feeling it from your constituents? Are you still hearing it from your customers? Is there the public will to bring pressure both on companies and on government to
what's
respond?
interesting? I do think, and it sounds the senator and I think agree on this, that there's a window of opportunity that has opened now where there is a recognition that things must change in this country, and we must deliberately change both the way that government's operating, the way that business is operating, and I dare say the way that the nonprofit and philanthropic sector have been operating. And there needs to be much greater collaboration and much bigger visions, as the senator just articulated. The thing that worries me is we seem to lack a sense of urgency about this. And the problem is in the 21st century versus the 20th century. In the 20th century, we didn't have the global level of competition that we face now. So this is a totally different era. In China and in other countries, they're setting out to beat us at our own game in the 21st century. And anybody who's been over to China and spent time in there realizes that in the last 20 years or so, the Chinese have a city, Shanghai, that has 23 million people. They've built half of that city in the last 20 years. That means they've built a city the size of Los Angeles in 20 years. Now put aside what we think about China's policy toward human rights, et cetera, for a second, and just think about what that machine is in the 21st century that we're up against. And we are, dilly-dallying.
Here we're going to get the Second Avenue subway. It's coming
exactly.
to my neighborhood soon.
We will argue for 10 years about 2 miles of track, right, in a city or a metropolitan area. And my point is, the sense of urgency is what concerns me. I mean, I'm always trying to get us to go faster. Right. And I think companies like ours are trying to spur that conversation in a way that moves it along in a quicker way, because I think we have a big threat right now.
You agree?
I would agree on the sense of urgency. And there are things, as somebody has sat on the corporate side, at the state side, and in the Senate, mayors and governors got better records of getting things done than the United States Congress, and that's gotten, obviously exponentially worse. And I think what's happening, I know sitting around with Democratic Senate caucus sometimes, and some of my colleagues are talking about all of these programs that are going to help people, and they wonder why nobody shows up. I think there's been a disconnect between thinking that, again, some of these top-down programs, people believe it's really going to affect their lives and move their lives economically forward. And I fear sometimes, because at the end of the day, because of sometimes the lack of, and this is not always fair or right, I think government doesn't always get it wrong by any means, but more people still at the end of the day trust the private sector to be able to implement quicker than they do the public sector. Right. So is there a case here, if that is the circumstance, to figure out how we more actively engage with the private sector to kind of get these public sector results where we want to have everybody upward economic mobility, and what we have in our politics, because there aren't new big ideas moving people, is people default back to single issue politics, which just simply further builds up the gridlock, and it becomes a self-fulfilling policy.
Let me ask you one question about your proposal of the R Corp. Is the purpose to incentivize business, or is it to kind of create a playbook for business? I mean, is there uncertainty about what business ought to be doing in this space?
I think, to Blair's comment, that the idea that when you have, we've got a whole series of other factors that are affecting our economy as well, with globalization, with advance of technology. I mean, the Atlantic, your partner Atlantic's issue this month, the end of work with the advent of robots, a lot of forces. Somehow, and I say this again as somebody who did very well in the technology business, but trying to think about this rebalance between capital and labor in a way that says we're going to incent a little bit more to make that labor component a more valuable input.
Right.
And the way you make it a little more valuable input is you pay them a little more and you upgrade their skills. And pay them a little more and upgrading the skills, easy to say, hard to put into exact policy, that's going to create for the company a better net long-term outcome. And if you give that sense, again, what the goal here is, I think most of us would probably agree, with the exception of a few folks I work with, that if you work 40 hours a week, you ought to be able to put food on your table and not be dependent upon government benefits. But in our current circumstance, you can work 40 hours a week and still be on food stamps, Medicaid, and have to receive EITC. Right. Somehow that is a very major disconnect then from the model that we had in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Can I just give one?
Yeah, and then do we have mics to circulate? Okay, if you want to stand up and if you have something you want to bring in the conversation, get ready.
Just one very quick example of the innovations that I think the senator is talking about, which we've done at Starbucks. And by the way, I want to preface this by saying we haven't gotten this right. We're figuring this out as we go, and we're doing the best that we can. But we're trying to innovate in ways that will allow people to move forward. And you may have, some of you may have been at the panel yesterday with Dr. Michael Crow, and the senator spoke first at that panel. And we talked about a lot of things, but one of the things that we talked about is the innovation that Starbucks is doing with Arizona State University, which is called the College Achievement Plan. When you come to work for Starbucks, you can work for 20 hours a week, you can work part-time as a barista, and go and do all 4 years of getting your degree at Arizona State University online for free, tuition free. And this is the first time any company has ever done this. So you can get it in any discipline, and you can leave the company the day after you finish. So if you want to be a nurse, you want to be an engineer, you want to be a biology major, whatever you can do, at whatever you want to do. And people have stopped me and said, why would you ever do that?
Yeah, I was going to say, why would you do that?
Why would a company work with a land grant institution with an innovator like Dr. Crow? Why would Howard Schultz and Starbucks do that? And the answer is because it is about a triple bottom line for us. It is, in fact, good for society to have more college graduates. And by the way, with the internet, we can actually scale to infinity. So the notion of everybody shouldn't or can't go to college actually goes out the window with the internet in terms of the cost structure of scaling. So it's good for society. It's great for the individual who earns $1 million more over the course of their career and has a 50% lower probability of being unemployed. And guess what? It's actually good for the company too, because I can pretty much assure you that when we send someone to college, I can predict what coffee product they're going to be drinking for the rest of their life. Right? It's just not that hard. We've built a customer for life. And by the way, they now, to the point that the senator raised earlier, they now have an income and a career pathway, which goes from Starbucks to maybe a mid-level job, because we are a feeder into those kinds of positions. And they have an income to be able to sustain purchasing our products and others. So it is looking for those triple bottom lines, if you will, or triple three-way wins that are the most sustainable changes that we can put forth.
And can I add one thing on top
Yes,
of that?
one thing, and then I see a hand here, I see a lot of hands, so
the
yes.
The immediate challenge would be, if you're saying to a policymaker, well, why would you want to, Starbucks is already doing that, Home Depot's already doing that, Container Store, Warner, why would you want to put a policy implication around this? Well, because net, if we can move this from a dozen enlightened CEOs to 1,000 entities and giving a little policy boost for you to do that, net society, when so much change going on, I'll take that risk of the economic inefficiency of giving you an extra little benefit.
Sir, yes.
Yes, there we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is a great discussion, and if we take a look at it on two totally sectors, the two obvious sectors that we are talking about, corporate sector and then the public sector. If we take the corporate sector and take the leadership of, and my question really is going to be, how do you get it done and move it? You're talking about China. They've gone ahead. We've got to get moving and do this now. And the question is, how do we get in the corporate sector? Who leads this? If you've got Starbucks, Aetna, Home Depot, is it the board? Is it the CEO? And it's the whole model that the senator mentioned of taking the old model, which is shareholders. How do we take?
So how does it change?
How do we take a new model?
Where does it lead from? So let's take a couple of other comments, and then I'm going to bring it back.
Chris.
Yes, right there and back, and then we have someone up front.
All right, now was this comment that I made too broad, or was it?
No. It's a good question.
I'd like to get an answer for that.
Yes, we will. But we've got 10 minutes, and we're going to get as many voices in on as possible, and then we'll come back. Yes.
Kudos for this, and Starbucks is leading the way. Senator, thank you. My comment or question or plea is keep it simple. don't make it too complex from a governmental standpoint, and make it as simple as possible. It's got to be an elevator pitch and not 2, 3, 4, 5 points, or change to an R Corp, and let business take over. So keep it simple and then let business take over.
Okay, we'll take one. Thank you. Good comment. We'll take one more.
Very excited to hear the things you're talking about. Angela Blackwell from PolicyLink. And many of the opportunity youth that you've lifted up are youth of color, Latino, Asian, African American. And with the shifting demographics, people of color becoming the majority very quickly, we know that disproportionately we're going to be talking about how to make sure that the people who are going to be the future are ready to lead and support the future. That agenda of inclusion has become a national imperative. Do you think that it is possible to combine the conversation that you've lifted up with the current angst that the nation is feeling around racial inclusion to try to create that urgency and help people to see themselves in the success of all?
So do you want to respond to hers first, and then I want to come back to this question of who leads in the firm? Who are you aiming at? Are you aiming at the board? Are you aiming at the executives here, the role of shareholders?
Go first.
Go ahead.
Well, I'd say very, very quickly. By nature, if you're talking about, unfortunately in our country, low and moderate income workers, they are disproportionately people of color. So if you have a upward economic mobility for people who, and there also happen to be a lot of, white, particularly in rural communities, who fall in this category as well, who all feel disenfranchised at this point. So starting with how you give a upward path on economic mobility for low and moderate income workers within a new corporate form. And again, I'm not saying let me make clear, I'm not saying you get rid of the C Corp or the S Corp or other entities, and we have plenty of other corporate forms. We have REITs, we have a whole host of other things. This would be simply a new option. You get the benefit. To your comment, amen on that, pay and training. Let's, you want to solve all the other roles problems, have at it, but not in this form. And how do you get it done, and how do you get people? I think before this is ready for prime time, I've got a number of Republican partners I'm talking with, and I'm not, the wonder of an idea like this is, I'm not sure where I get more grief from the Democrats or the Republicans, which is the right place you want to be, because this is not, making capitalism work again. I think that has a fairly broader appeal than what we've got right now, which is, the power of the unfettered job makers versus top-down government redistribution. Both of those are 20th century ideas that don't really work in this new economy. So I think it's worth the journey. And I do think the way to get the corporates you take the BRTs, you take the business councils. What you're going to need are evangelists within the business community. Yeah. Politicians alone aren't going to be able to do this. You're going to need evangelists within the business community. And there are a growing number. What has not happened as I've delved into this space, there is the conscientious capitalism movement. There's the inclusive capitalist inclusion, something in the UK. There's the fourth sector. There's a group out of Harvard that Bertolini and the Aetna folks are involved. There's a lot of stuff going on. Nobody's convened them all around a model that actually you could shoot at. Well, stay tuned. And I'm signing up folks now to join in this parade.
All right, you got a signatory.
I think the answer to who does that is the board has to give the CEO the authority to do that. And I think what we're seeing some breakthroughs in that now. And I think there are a number of visionary CEOs out there who are starting to embrace this idea. But recognize that this is new muscle for corporate America. Businesses haven't really worked collaboratively on social issues. And so we're figuring some of this out. But make no mistake, when you talk about an issue that Angela just raised of opportunity youth, and you're talking about 5.6 million disengaged young people in the US alone, you're talking about an issue that's much, much bigger than any single corporation can possibly take on. I mean, we hire about 65,000 people a year in the US. If we turned our entire hiring engine toward opportunity youth, we wouldn't make a dent in the problem, right? So clearly there has to be a collaboration. So how is that happening? Well, one of the ways that that's starting to happen is Howard Schultz is actually calling other CEOs now and saying, hey, we've made a commitment to hire 10,000 opportunity youth at Starbucks. We want to get to a much larger number. Can you join us and work with us on this issue together? Because it's not a competitive issue. This is an issue about the future of America and the future of American business, and we need to line up together. So as the senator said, much more to come on that, but we're looking at that with Aspen Institute and with others about creating a continuum or a pipeline for these young people. So wherever they are, if you have a second grade reading level today, it's probably the case that companies can't engage with you. That's not our core competency. But there are nonprofits out there who that's exactly what they do. So let's move these young people through the continuum, get them to the point of job readiness where they're ready for work, and then let's have a coalition of the willing, of companies who are ready to engage and employ and interview those young people and put them on a pathway to employment. I said this yesterday, I'll say it again today. A job and a career is the end game. All of the rest of the things that we do are means to that end. As important, I'm the biggest proponent of higher education you'll ever see in your life, but if you come out of college and you can't find a job, you are arguably worse off than you would have been if you didn't go to college.
Yeah,
we have to have jobs for young people. I just want to say
see.
one other thing about what Angela said, because it's so important. This opportunity youth issue, to me, is the issue of our time. You know, it is so critical. And how do we think about this in a different way? How do we engage young people and engage companies in a different way? And I think the answer lies in the notion of beginning to break down the barriers between the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic world. And you asked a good question. I would say to you, our CEO tried to do that. He went out with Race Together and writing on cups and tried to start a conversation based on the era that we're in right now. If you think about Charleston a couple of weeks ago, it feels like 1965, okay? That's just not acceptable to the United States of America today. I don't think any of us want to live in that world. But we have to welcome each other into the room to have these conversations and discussions.
Try again. Just hold it close.
I would argue that one of the biggest inefficiencies in government procurement that could be brought to bear on this is in defense spending. You have bases that the Pentagon wants to close and weapon systems that it doesn't need, that legislators won't let them do away with because of concerns about jobs and loss of jobs in their districts. If you took that same money and gave it to the NEA and invested in arts funding, you have a very sticky, sticks to local communities. Artists buy a lot of coffee, by the way. And,
They do indeed.
And you have, over the last 30 years, an incredibly accountable system through the panel, citizen panels that review these arts applications based on the political pressures that occurred 30 years ago. A very citizen accountable way to procure services, arts services and arts products that would be much more efficient at putting a lot of people to work.
Sounds like a good comment. Leave that
So
here.
do you think that's feasible?
I just make the comment, under the stupidity of sequestration, you're looking at a non-thoughtful way to both cut the arts and defense, which neither one of those makes any sense. You know, until and unless our country both deals on the revenue side and on the entitlement side, we are simply rearranging the fiscal chairs on the proverbial Titanic, because we are basically, what we are doing is robbing from the millennial generation all the ability to invest in things like education, infrastructure, research that made our country great. And I can, the unfortunate thing, I've got way too much data on that, and I've got the scars of having led the so-called Gang of Six on the effort to bring that down so you can make the investments. And it's going to take, I think there is a moment, but that will come. It's got to come. And the only comment I'd make about some of the earlier things is, I think what Howard and I think what Blair and Starbucks is doing is great. But I do believe we need to make, I believe, as somebody who's been advocating for these things for some time, you got to have a capitalism-driven model around here. And the idea of, and one of the reasons back to the earlier gentleman's questions about keep it simple was the idea of a corporate election versus simply another corporate tax break brings a totally different mindset to the question and to the problem that I think might get more traction.
All right, you have the last comment.
I have the last comment,
Yes.
great, okay.
So make it brief,
I'll make it a good
and
one.
we'll wrap up this morning.
So I attended a session earlier here at the festival. They talked about the issue around the private sector operating in a very lean mindset, and companies are lean. Companies are getting more out of the resources. They're operating in a very lean way. Profits are up. They're doing stock buybacks and other kinds of things. So high efficiency. So you have this concept over here around lean, right?
Well, I don't know if stock buybacks has to do with lean, but anyway, yeah.
But the idea is efficiency, right? It's about efficiency.
No, it's about returning more money to the shareholders.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So the notion around wages, you have this idea of how do you address the issue around wages when you have this other concept around trying to be as efficient as you possibly can as a corporation. How do you balance and reconcile those two ideas, knowing that at the bottom line you have to make a business case for this within the corporate enterprise?
So I think we've heard some about the business case, but let's
Let
end
me
on
just
that.
very quickly, because everything in our tax structure already favors accumulation of capital over labor. And I say this, and I was guilty. I was in tech companies. Tech companies uniformly pay a lower tax rate than companies with a large number of low-value employees because you don't have as many deductions. You don't have all the tax advantages you get by making investments in innovation. We've made a choice, and I think the right choice, to favor innovation, technology, huge value creation. With that comes a whole series of tax advantages that allows, we have a 35% corporate rate. Anybody in the technology business paying 35%, fire your CFO. You pay, in effect, a rate in mid-teens. If you're a large retailer or a small retailer on a domestic corp and you've got hundreds of people working for you, you're paying close to 35. So some level of rebalancing between capital and labor here. You can still be lean, and I believe still invest in your workforce. And I think there may be a way to get this right, to be determined.
So let me thank you both. Just a quick advertisement for the work of the Institute, the Business Society program. There's a lot of work online here that you can access, but the senator actually spoke to an issue that we've been working on for many, many years, which is on curbing short-termism in business and capital markets. So this has been very wonderful for me this morning to kind of pick up on these questions here on the stage. And thank all of you for being here with us early this morning, and may the conversation continue.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.